Do you know what separates us from animals? It's our ability to learn, and learn at a high level. Complex, nuanced, big, wrinkly brained things that only human beings are capable of. Yeah, a dog can learn to sit and roll over, and a wild animal will learn how to hunt more efficiently over time. Whoopee! But you know what humans can learn? We can learn to jiggle peek in Counter-Strike. We can learn to juggle. What else do you really need at the end of the day? You'll never see an animal do any of that shit, not even Air Bud. Point is, we can learn. And I think today it's important that all of you watching learn that criticizing video games is not a crime. I really think it's time we stop treating the purchasing of AAA games like it's some kind of heroic charitable act. For some reason now, there's been a trend where even if a game releases and it's absolute repulsive dog shit, people treat it like it's some kind of GoFundMe for a noble cause where it's like, yeah, but you bought the game and that's what matters. Thanks for supporting. Or if you decide that, hey, I bought this game and I really don't like it, so you start to criticize it, for some reason there's a not small group of people that will label you evil and say that what you're doing is just wrong and unethical because so many people worked on the game. How could you say these awful things about it? I just think it's so backwards and weird. A lot of people have been upset that a lot of customers are criticizing Redfall heavily. Redfall has been catching more shit than the porta potty at a construction site. It is a bad game. And of course, I am guilty of shitting on it pretty ruthlessly, and it's because I expect more out of the studio behind it, which is Arcane, a fantastic studio. But what they've released here is nothing shy of a dirty hemorrhoid that is an absolute blemish on the butthole of the entire gaming industry. So I made a whole video just kind of going over all of its weakest parts and being pretty harsh on it. And that's because it's a $70 game. And it doesn't even deliver on the most bare bones quality standards you would expect in AAA gaming. It is 30 FPS locked on console, for example, which is a laughable joke, and it doesn't even meet the threshold for what you would expect from a modern title. It is lacking in every possible department. It feels like I just was the victim of an NFT rug pull for paying $70 for this game. It's not good. And pretty much everyone everywhere is saying the same things that I am. But there is a not super small group of people that are treating this game like it's an ASPCA commercial, and they're having like some kind of bleeding heart response to it where they feel protective, like their motherly instincts have kicked in and they need this game to suckle on their bosom to keep it safe. So they're getting mad at people that are saying the game is bad. Like, how could you? So many developers worked years on this project just for you to shit on it? Ridiculous. Have you no heart at all? And I just think that is so misguided and ridiculous. People have paid $70 for this. That is not a cheap game by any means. That is the highest level price that you can charge for a standard game. So you would expect the highest level quality product from it, which you do not get here. So it is entirely within people's rights to call it out for how lacking it is. It doesn't mean they hate everyone that worked on the game. I certainly don't. I just wish that the game wasn't so disappointingly bad. But there's nothing wrong with pointing out it is weak. It is a bad game. I hope that Arcane's next venture is a successful one. A lot of people are pretending that there's a lot of angry customers that are wiggling their fingers celebrating that the game is shitty, which I haven't seen. I don't know why anyone would celebrate a game being shitty after they've wasted $70 on it. I'm certainly not happy that I spent $70 on a stinker. I would have much preferred that it was a fun game that I really got into, but I didn't. Somewhere in the deep multiverse right now, there is a Charles White that is playing the fuck out of Redfall, and it's a Game of the Year contender because it was an amazing product. But that's not the reality we live in. We got a little Weenie Hut Jr. Happy Meal shovelware game with Redfall, and they charge 70 doubloons for it, which sucks. There's nothing wrong with people saying that it's bad. So stop labeling people with these harsh, mean labels because they insulted the game. I don't see a lot of celebration that the game is bad. That wouldn't make any sense. No one likes wasting money. So I just wanted to get that out of the way immediately because it ties into the bigger topic of the video, which is Phil Spencer himself, the head of Xbox, recently did an interview where he talked about his personal disappointment in Redfall and all of its shortcomings. It's a brutally honest and very interesting look into Xbox itself. So I want to dive into all of it because he gets into more than just Redfall. He gets into Xbox in general and how it's like really not even a competitor in the console wars, which was shocking to see him say that out loud because there's still so much copium from people that swear by Xbox, you know, consumer warriors that will fight tooth and nail for their favorite billion-dollar company, they still believe Xbox is a very worthwhile console, even though there's no real exclusives, no real reason to own it. I'm not here to really get into the weeds of it, but it's something Phil Spencer also recognizes. Yeah, you know what? I will get into it real quick. Xbox has a laughable catalog of games. They have absorbed so many heavy hitters like Bethesda, but have nothing to show for it on Xbox that makes picking up the console worth it. There is no reason to own an Xbox, unless it's just what your friends are on already and you want to play with them. That's the only real reason. There's no other incentive to buy an Xbox, because the games go to PC anyway. Game Pass is an amazing deal, but no one's getting Game Pass for the first-party exclusives on Xbox or anything, because there are none. There's Halo Infinite, which was treading water for a long time and only just now starting to find its footing with some actual content, and that's about it. There's really nothing else on Xbox that would make it worthwhile other than just playing with your friends. It's a joke in the grand scheme of the console wars with Sony and the PlayStation 5 and the Nintendo Switch. But even the PlayStation 5 is lacking in exclusives. It's just... It was refreshing to see that even Phil Spencer sees this. Now anyway, let's jump in. So first and foremost, this article kind of sets the stage for Microsoft's blunders and their, rocky, rough patch that they're going through. They recently had their acquisition of Activision Blizzard blocked, which was a $68 billion acquisition, by the way. And there's also been a 30% drop in the Xbox hardware revenue, which honestly is a lot better than I thought. I figured that'd be like a fucking 50 to 60% drop, because no one that I've heard of recently is buying Xboxes, because again, there's not a real reason to. When asked about Redfall, he really does kind of just own up to all of it. And when I initially read it, my impression was that he kind of pushed it off onto Arcane Studios and less on like Microsoft itself. But when I really went back and watched the interview, the impression I get is that it was pretty somber. He truly does feel like there's a big weight on the shoulder of Microsoft to deliver quality, and they're missing the mark. So I no longer feel like he's trying to pass the blame off anywhere. It seems like he's just trying to take it all head on. So he said, there's nothing more difficult for me than disappointing the Xbox community, and just kind of watch the community lose confidence and be disappointed. Disappointed, I'm upset with myself. I kind of revisit our process. I think back to the announcement of 60 frames per second, then we weren't shipping 60 frames per second. That was our punch in the chin, rightfully, a couple weeks ago. This is him talking about how Redfall isn't even 60 frames on Xbox. Again, a fucking joke. But they are committed to getting it there eventually, though I think it's inexcusable to release the game knowing that it's not 60 frames or even at the most baseline quality you'd expect for $70. He then goes on to sing the praises of the studio behind Redfall, Arcane, which is a studio I also like, and their pedigree really does speak for itself. They've made banger after banger, and now they haven't. I also wasn't a huge fan of Deathloop either, but at least the game had ambition and it did have interesting ideas. I just don't think it was executed super well. But now, I think Redfall, there is no way of explaining anything about it that could have even been remotely construed as good or well put together. He also said something that I found particularly interesting. He said, "We do mock reviews for every game that we launch, and this is double digits lower than where we thought we would be with this game through those." That's one of the disappointing things. We would never strive to launch a game that we thought was going to review in the low 60s. It's not part of our goals. This game does not deserve to be in the low 60s. It shouldn't even be cracking the mid 40s. It is not a good game by any metric at all. The only reason why it even might be even flirting with the low 60s is because people feel so bad for it and are remembering the good old days of Arcane and don't want to accept that this is a bad game and there's nothing wrong with calling it out for being such. In fact, I would argue that it's actually healthier for the developers so they can see where to improve and what not to do again. But yeah, anyway, what I found interesting though is the mock reviews. What fucking benefit is there to doing mock reviews if the reviews come from internal teams? Obviously, they're not going to go hog wild and say everything, super bold. They're not going to be mean or aggressive with it, whereas in the gaming space, people aren't pulling punches. People are going to be brutally honest. So I really feel like mock reviews are kind of worthless. There's got to be a better system in place, and I think Phil does take notice of that. I think this has been a wake-up call for that whole process. But I just don't understand why they would have ever been under the impression that doing mock reviews with internal teams is somehow going to be helpful and a good metric of where reviews might end up in the real world. Because again, no one's going to be being that honest with their boss and their peers. No, it's just not going to happen. Everyone's going to try and sugarcoat things and be as gentle as possible, caress their cheeks a little bit, butter them up. They're not going to really give you the nitty-gritty tough to swallow pills about the product. This next part is where things get very wild. So he said that we're not in the business of out-consoling Sony or out-consoling Nintendo. He then goes on to elaborate saying, I see the commentary that if you just build great games, everything will turn around. It's just not true that if we go off and build great games, all of a sudden you're going to see console share shift in some dramatic way. We lost the worst generation to lose in the Xbox One generation, where everybody built their digital library of games. We want our Xbox community to feel awesome, but this idea that if we just focused more on great games on our console, that somehow we're going to win the console race, doesn't really lay into the reality of most people. There's no world where Starfield is an 11 out of 10 and people start selling their PS5s. That's not going to happen. I overall disagree with his core statement here about even if they were making great games, the Xbox is still kind of left in the dust, saying that no one's going to sell their PS5 or Switch for an Xbox, which I think is a weird way of looking at it because you really shouldn't be trying to think of like stealing Sony fanboys or stealing Nintendo fanboys for Xbox. You can be a fan of Sony, Nintendo, and Xbox. Like, you could just be someone who enjoys good games, and each console offers good games. That would be the ideal circumstance. So if you did have great games, system sellers, I really do think people would go to it. So I disagree that great games wouldn't matter. At least that's the way I interpreted his statement. But he does talk about some important things as well. And it's also shocking to see that the head of Xbox, the fucking guy at Xbox, is just openly admitting defeat to Sony and Nintendo in the console wars, saying that they're not under any delusion about out-consoling Sony or Nintendo here. So just kind of surrendering there, which was odd to read. But Phil Spencer calls a very important attention to the last generation of consoles where Xbox was not even a player, not even in the conversation. People probably didn't even realize Xbox One existed because it was such a fucking piece of shit. Xbox One aimed to be more than a gaming console. It aimed to be an entire entertainment hub, but it failed on that front and also failed at being a gaming console. They completely just wiped their ass with the idea of having good games anymore and wanted to get a little bigger. Their gluttony, their eyes were bigger than their stomach. They tried to bite off a market share of something that they really shouldn't have tried touching, which was just general entertainment. They needed to focus on gaming, which is what made the Xbox 360 so special, because the 360 had an unbelievably stacked catalog of games. 360 fucking went wild with how many games and how many great games it offered, and then you went to the next generation, and the Xbox One had fucking nothing. Actually nothing. And the PlayStation 4 went really hard on getting these very strong titles for their platform. And of course, Nintendo always has incredible exclusives, so they also went hard, and Xbox floundered. And they completely lost that generation, and Phil Spencer recognizes the severity of that because it got people off of Xbox and made them Sony customers or Nintendo customers, and people just kind of forgot about Xbox even making games, and it was really hard to try and claw that back. So now, with the Series X and everything, they tried to make these big strides of acquiring so much talent in the gaming space, acquiring very well-respected studios, getting fucking Bethesda, of all things, under their umbrella to try and really pump up their catalog of games because they recognize what a disaster it was to abandon that. But they're playing catch-up and they're not really making ground right now. The best thing Xbox has done is Game Pass. But it's also not exclusive to Xbox because you can access it on PC as well, which is usually just a better experience, like in the case of Redfall. You get 60 FPS on PC, you don't get 60 FPS on Xbox. So why the fuck would you even use Game Pass on Xbox for something like that? You wouldn't. You'd use it on PC. So they're just having a really hard time of getting strong titles and making it a good catalog that makes people want to get the Xbox Series X. But Phil Spencer says that even if they did have an incredible catalog of games, no one's switching at this point, which I just wholeheartedly disagree with. I feel like if Xbox did have an incredibly stacked catalog like the 360 did, people would be more than open to checking out the Series X. They would be more than open to considering getting the Xbox and playing those games. That's just the way it works. No one is playing the Nintendo Switch for third-party games. No one's getting the Switch so that way they can play fucking Elden Ring or anything. It's not happening. The Switch can barely run mobile games. The reason people have the Switch is because their catalog of exclusives, their first-party games, are so good, so people get the Switch for that and nothing else. So if the Xbox had incredible games, just like the Switch does, that are exclusive to the Xbox, I don't see why people wouldn't get it for it. Again, I think the Switch is the perfect case study here. That is an outdated, archaic piece of hardware. It fucking sucks when it comes to its technical aspect. But no one cares because the games on it slap. The first party games, rather, and nothing else, not third party games. I would be shocked if anyone ever played a third party game on the Switch on their own volition. They're only getting it for the first party games. So if the Xbox, which does have great specs, if they had good games on there, I really don't see why people would just be like, ooh, yucky, I'm not getting an Xbox, even for those incredible games. I feel like they'd be more than willing to. So yeah, unfortunately, that's not where we're at right now. Xbox is just printing things that no one wants. Fucking Binky Moose Knuckles, Grand Adventure, Redfall. Like, no one's going to be getting an Xbox for any of that at all. It just becomes completely worthless. But if they turn it around and start making great games, I don't see why they couldn't at least make themselves less of a joke in the console wars or the general gaming space. So yeah, I just want to talk about this because I actually really appreciated Phil Spencer's honesty here with everything and how willing he was to be open with all of it, because I imagine as the head of Xbox, that's a really hard thing to just take on the chin. Just come as the fucking face of this company, which gets spit on a lot because it's not doing super hot against the other consoles or anything, and the games haven't been great. And just come forward and just be really open and honest with it. That takes a lot of guts. So I applaud him for that. I appreciate the insight, and I really am hoping for a turnaround for Xbox. I would love to dust mine off and have a reason to play it, but right now, I don't. But hopefully in the future there will be. So I just kind of wanted to go over all of this. That's about it. See ya.